And on behalf of Thomas Flill, who is announced here, who we have to apologize because he is very ill and he is not able to join us, so he will not be here. That is why we decided, and Renshi agreed to become Thomas, and I am Flill, and so we will represent him in this way and introduce and guide us this evening. May I introduce Rin Alatalu. She is here, and she is the vice president of ICOMOS. And vice president, that means she is responsible for Europe. She is representing Europe in the ICOMOS, in the International Board of ICOMOS. And so she is also Mrs. ICOMOS Europe, so to say. Rin is from Estonia and did a lot of work and researches on cultural heritage and on architecture. She wrote a PhD about the transitional society from nation's conscience to the Estonian SSR into the harasser of the private owner of the Republic of Estonia in 2012. So it was one of the first researchers, as far as I realized it, which were concerned and reflecting the whole situation and what kind of change this was followed or was the impact on heritage preservation. And she runs some activities and campaigns on an international level, as for example, for the National Cultural Heritage Year, for the European Cultural Heritage Days, and others. And she wrote several books about especially 20th century architecture in Estonia, but also in the Baltic region. So I'm very glad that you are here and that we can guide you through the whole presentation. And we will start with two presentations by Dumitru Rusu and by Johanna Blokker, which will be completed by Danica Petrova. And then we will try to organize something like a panel discussion or like a round table and change the seats and start the discussion on the socialist modernism albums. So now it's up to you to introduce our speakers.
Thank you, Jörg. Thank you for such a long introduction on me, but my task is now to introduce Dumitru Rusu, who is representing both Moldova and Romania. And he is an architect and a photographer and a real enthusiast what concerns socialist modernism or late 20th century architecture. And he's representing also Baku, which is association of the research of architecture. And as a member of Baku, he has been publishing, most writing and then editing and photographing, and finally publishing a collection of books on modernist architecture. We have enjoyed his presentations already for tonight, and today is the grand finale to introduce the book on Germany. Please, Dimitri.
Okay. Hello, everyone. It's more or less the same people. So, okay. Today I will make a small introduction on socialist modernism and on our project of web map, and also we will get into detail on socialist modernism book on Germany. About the context. The architecture of the socialist period, and more precisely the modernist tendencies between 1955 and 1991 as a concept, are becoming more and more popular in specialist circles. In our case, socialist modernism is a research platform created by the Baku Association, focusing on those modernist trends from Central and Eastern Europe. Focusing on those modernist trends from Central and Eastern Europe, which have been insufficiently explored in broader context of global architecture. Socialist modernism is an approach to architecture that was typical to the former socialist countries between 1955 and 1991. Most of it left uncovered by architectural history writings. The modernist trend was officially adopted as a result of historical events. 1955 was the official moment when useless stylistical elements in the architecture were abandoned. The Soviet Communist Party. From there on, Stalinist or realist socialist architecture was replaced through the socialist bloc. Socialist modernism is a desire to go back to pre-World War II modernism, with architecture attempting to fulfill both cultural requirements and utilitarian and economic ones, the latter having priority. At the same time, the society resents this type of architecture because of the policies enforced by socialist authorities. Often, this heritage is not seen for what it is, as a complex of architectural objects of urban ensembles, but as a result of bad policies. Central and Eastern Europe, Caucasus region, and Central Asia boast a number of important architectural monuments that are representative for the post-World War II identity of each country and express the aspiration of socialist-era architects. Starting in 1955 and ending with the fall of communism in 1991. Between 1955 and 1970, Central and Eastern Europe, Caucasus region, and Central Asia experienced a strong urban development. As a result of industrialization visible in all cities and districts, in large and medium cities, Berlin, Warsaw, Budapest, Prague, Bratislava, and others. Collective living neighborhoods divided in micro-districts built during that period covered large areas, included all complementary functions, health, education, culture, shopping, sports, etc. Even if we have some examples of good practice of conservation, at least, and maybe promising future restoration works by authorities, which is great, most part of these buildings are still found today in advanced state of decay. In today's economic and political situation, there is a great risk that these buildings will disappear, some of them being already illegally demolished or brutally renovated, without taking into account their architectural value. On the other hand, we were able to notice that the interest of this type of architecture has increased. One way to measure is the success of socialist modernism, the platform initiated by Baku, including a website, Facebook pages, Instagram, Tumblr, Pinterest, and others. So far, we have counted about 1 million users. The growing online trend and the vivid interest of platforms members encourage us to extend our initiative with the database and interactive map. Even if a large part of them are not actively involved, rather they were spectators attracted by the obscure and abandoned edifices. On the other hand, publishing and promoting the works of that period in social media could help us save the forgotten heritage, whose incontestable historical, aesthetic, and cultural value has long been ignored. The socialist modernist, the interactive map and smartphone application reveals the most valuable examples of modernist architecture created in the socialist period, from buildings to neighborhoods, parks, recreation areas, etc. The website offers you the possibility to navigate through the map in all the countries of the former socialist bloc. Objects are identified according to architectural, artistic, and urban value criteria, as well as their rarity, that is often exceptional. All monitored objectives are provided with the following details: name, site, planning institute, planning and construction period, literature references, and contributor of the research material. An experimental version of the map, version 2, is already available on our website, socialistmodernist.com. The information already introduced in the database on a trial basis is available to experts and members of the public who have an interest in socialist modernist heritage. They are also invited to contribute with information, images, and videos to the database. All information originating outside the association will be checked and confirmed by database admins. The Bureau for Art and Urban Research, Baku, is an association for conservation and urban and cultural rehabilitation. Its main lines of action are to protect, preserve, and rehabilitate socialist built heritage and art, more precisely to monitor the maintenance, protection, and conservation activities in Central and Eastern Europe, the Caucasus region, Central Asia, and other countries allied to the former socialist bloc. Besides the preserving the historical value of the buildings, we also strive to improve the general urban image. We will present 10 books of Baku Association published in the last 6 years with focus on Germany version, and a few architectural guide maps of the capitals of the former socialist bloc countries. A palpable results of our attempt to raise awareness and convince the public about the value of heritage are Baku publication on socialist modernism, the 10 inventory books. The first one was published in 2017 and the second edition in 2019, Socialist Modernism in Romania, Republica Moldova. Then we published Socialist Modernism in Ukraine, Socialist Modernism in former Yugoslavia, and Socialist Modernism in Eastern Bloc. And now we will focus on the Socialist Modernism in Germany, which includes 71 sites, with an introduction by Jörg Haspel. This first edition with a different cover of the cover, let's say this is a box of the cover, was published in 2019, and the second edition in 2020. We may say that in Germany, after 1955, modernist stylistics started to become visible both in architectural design and theoretical debates. The apartment buildings erected after that have a spatial volumetric composition. The facades and interiors are devoid of useless plaster decoration, using mostly new finishings and colors. More attention was paid to the German functionalist tradition, but sometimes also to contemporary international architecture that inspired certain elements. These new approaches were coordinated by architects formed before World War II, among whom it's Richard Paulik. Only 1 year later, in 1957, the first experimental block of flats were built in Berlin and Dresden. This became a model for prefabricated buildings in many cities. The first residential neighborhood of standardized buildings made of precast elements was planned and built in 1957 in Hoyerswerda. Economic policies aimed at repairing the urban tissue were re-elected and architecture by type projects and the new stylistic approach. The new directions required, besides the elimination of useless stylistic elements, a purge of shapes, the improvement of facades by genuine underlining of walls and elements with large panels blocks. The socialist ideological norm to create standardized designs is locally adopted through a series of designs which, while obeying political directives, also to introduce elements that individualize buildings and stress their modernist character. Nowadays, the eastern part of Germany face some of the problems. Through the 90s, the former Eastern Germany was intensely built. Buildings erected during the East German modernist period from the 60s to the 80s were torn down or completely renovated, and new buildings appeared. Large parts of the city centers were through a massive renovation. Sections of neighborhoods were upgraded, balconies were attached to the facades, and new high-tech infrastructure was provided for shops and banks. Another interesting change was the coating of the facades for thermal insulation, aimed in fact and hiding the traces of the socialist society. Very often the colors of the facades and in residential complexes was changed to the lighter, more positive shade. This happened in the almost all Eastern Germany neighborhoods, without any consideration for the architectural style in which they were created. Over the past 20 years, many buildings with different functions were demolished, changed, completely rebuilt, or replaced with new constructions, often having the same functionality but in Western aesthetics. Among them, there are hotels, administrative buildings, shopping centers, and housing blocks. Grobstraße, Hornblatt, Berlin, Galeria Kaufhof, Berlin, Alexanderplatz, Zentrum Wehrhaus, Prager Straße, Dresden. Several housing complexes, buildings are either lying abandoned, awaiting demolition or demolished. Restaurant, Ahornblatt, Berlin Mitte. Hochhaus, Scheiben, Halle Neustadt. Vermelde Techie-Haus, formerly Telekom, Dresden, and many others. Here are a few notable examples. The Palace of the Republic was the seat of parliament of the German Democratic Republic, the Volkshammer, People's Chamber, were also serving various cultural purposes, located between Schlosshausplatz and Lustgarten, referred to jointly of Marx Engels Platz from 1955 to 1994, on an island in the River Spree. It also housed 2 large auditoria, art galleries, a theater, 13 restaurants, bowling alley, a post office, and a discotheque. The building was designed in 1973 by architect Heinz Graunder and was completed in 1976 on the site of the former Berlin Stadtschloss City Palace, destroyed in World War II. Just prior to the German reunification in October 1990, the structure was found to be contaminated with asbestos and closed for the public in 1990 by decree of the Volkskammer. By 2023, all the asbestos had been removed along with the internal and external things, allowing yet safe reconstruction of safe deconstruction. The Palace of the Republic was completely demolished by 2008 to make room for a reconstruction of the Stadtschloss, which began in 2013. I don't know exactly it was finished by now or... Okay. Inter Hotel Stadt Berlin was built in 1967 to 1970s, following the redevelopment of the Alexanderplatz. It was designed by the team of Roland Korn, Heinz Scharlip, and Hans-Erich Bogatsky. In 1993, after German reunification, it was renamed in Forum Hotel Berlin, and after its acquisition by a hotel group in 23, again renamed in Park in Radisson Berlin Alexanderplatz. The design of the curtain wall facade, as it's now it's designed in shape and color from the 1970 tower. Between May 2005, the entire 15,000 square meters of curtain wall facade was replaced with 7,000 mirror glass panels, giving a more sleek Western aesthetics, without considering the architectural style in which it was created. Central Post Office from Leipzig. The design and the function of the main post office were made according to the international standards of the time. The 7-story steel-framed rectangular construction with a projecting 6-story facade was built of apparent concrete, glass, and aluminium. On the top of right of the facade, a highly visible clock was mounted, which was dismantled in the 1990s. The hall were paved with natural stone slabs. The desk and the furniture were a cherry-colored wood, and the ceiling was made of sound-absorbing elements. After the war, the new post office building was the second biggest building in Leipzig, which together with the new opera forms the architectural shape of the former Karl-Marx-Platz. The 1964 post office building was listed as a modernist GDR monument and earmarked for conservation in 2011. I think by now it was redesigned and it's in use as partially as a hotel, no, and a venue place or something. Very strong criticism against the transformation of the building was addressed by conservation organization in German National Committee Commons to Federal Ministry for Built Environment of Germany, which was apparently not enough. The critics accused the planners, developers, owners of trying to disfigure the building and thus ignore the history of post-war architecture and Eastern modernism. In their opinion, spaces that have value as a perception areas should be preserved, among them the parcel and the postal banking hall, telephone booths, and the spatial staircase, all of them to be demolished according to the planned conservation. The architect Kurt Novotny had managed to build the most significant public building in the GDR. It represents an indispensable witness of history, and not just for Leipzig. This is a citation from an open letter to the Saxon state minister. Kulturpalast from Dresden. The Kulturpalast from Dresden, designed by architect Wolfgang Hansch, was built by the East German government in East German modernist style and inaugurated in 1969. The building has the biggest multi-purpose hall of the city of Dresden. It is being used by entertainment events and conferences. The rectangular structure with a base area of 170 meters was designed in similar style of the Bauhaus building facade. Also, Kulturpalast has a rectangular shape of bronze mirrored windows, which remind of a larger Palast Republic. The Dresden Kulturpalast has been placed under the protection as an architectural monument since 2008. The photos in this album, which is in fact an architectural digital guide, are a witness to the large diversity of genres and particular solutions, the bold expression of a socialist epoch trying to keep up with the times. What we tried to show was perhaps a need to stop time in order to concentrate on each individual element extracted from the deep current of world architecture. Today our heritage is the uneasy witness. Today's history became the history that shaped concrete and stone, but also made deep wounds that are hard to forget. Another 3 books published during the 2021 and 2022 are Socialist Modernism in Poland, with an introduction by Blazes Charkovsky. The next one is Socialist Modernism in Bulgaria, with an introduction by Emilia Kaleva and Anita Vasilyeva from 2021. And the last one is Socialist Modernism in Russia, which includes 80 sites, with an introduction by Natalia Dushkina, which was published in 2022. And Socialist Modernism in Hungary, which was published in 2022 also. And our freshly launched Socialist Modernism in the Caucasus with 71 sites, which was published in 2023. I have to mention that we will launch in the next 2 months the book entitled Socialist Modernism in Baltic Countries, with a contribution from Laura Ingerpu and Vaidas Petrulis. The combined concept of photo album and digital guide with QR codes connected to our Socialist Modernism interactive map and smartphone application on Apple and Google Play is an objective illustration of the Socialist Modernist phenomenon, through a series of examples of buildings and architectural ensembles erected between 1955 and 1991 in the former Eastern Bloc countries. The materials are the results of field research and of archive and library work performed by the Baku Association. The members of the association started documenting this trend 10 years ago and are still in the process of checking and adding information. In addition to the mentioned books, we continue to publish a series of maps with the capitals of countries from the former socialist bloc: Chisinau, Belgrade, Bucharest, Yerevan, Tbilisi, Moscow, St. Petersburg, Minsk, Warsaw, and Belgrade are still in production. And a map of Berlin, which I will show you now. So we have this cover, which is actually the map. The map is, which in fact has a QR code here, in which you can use it and connect it to our digital map. And here we have some drawings made by my sister, and also the map is also made by my sister. And on the back we have 26 sites, which are divided in sections: cultural, research, education, housing, administrative buildings, services, which are in fact hotels, restaurant, utilitarian function, and monumental, which are monuments and mosaics. So practically, this is a tool for tourists and for sympathizers of socialist modernism phenomenon. Okay, thank you. Although built during the socialist regime, these edifices promoted by Baku have been conceived in local context that were favorable to architecture creation, inspired by pre-war, War II modernism and Western modernism. Socialist modernist platform invites architects, urban planners, historians, art historians, conservationists, artists, activists, and anyone interested in this issue to contribute and to broaden the platform. Send us any information regarding neighborhoods, buildings, monuments, parks, and cultural landscapes, or any relevant architectural elements. Please don't forget to specify their location and address. All the information will be published on our website under the name of the author. We are currently working on a revitalization proposal for several socialist modernist objects or sites built inside municipalities of Romania and Republic of Moldova. In the first phase of the project, we will concentrate on the analysis, research, study, following by the second phase, when we will elaborate regulation and will deal with education of local authorities and inhabitants of those protected areas through a legislative program concerning the architectural stylistic of the buildings districts erected in socialist era. The proposal suggests the demolition of parasitic structures, prohibiting the closing of balconies and any type of DIY abusive rehabilitation, removing excessive advertising from the facades, and finally making these buildings, neighborhoods, leisure facilities, parks, etc. part of the historical heritage. So this is in a few words our presentation. So thank you very much for listening.
Dumitru, thank you very much for the presentation and for giving us, for introducing us in the situation in Germany and what is the balance of the last 20 years in preserving and renovating and rehabilitating modernist heritage in Germany and in Berlin. I would like to introduce Johanna Blokker. We are very grateful to Johanna Blokker because she gave us today, together with Danica Petrovic, together with Mrs. Richter, together with Konrad Frommelt, she gave us a wonderful insight in the situation in Cottbus. And she also showed us two of the examples which are mentioned in this book. That is the Stadthalle, which we visited, and the university campus, which is also mentioned and shown in the photograph book of Dumitru. And we thought about that maybe the map, where is the map? Can I have an example of the map? Maybe the map should be extended because the map is now only covering Cottbus and Berlin. But we think that it could Potsdam and Berlin, and we think that Cottbus should be included, and the map could be extended, and the list could be completed because it was so wonderful. We saw the campus university, we saw the Stadthalle, but also we saw a very specific contribution how to use prefabricated slab constructions in old towns and how to find a varied spectrum of possibilities to arrange it and to implement it, which is, from my point of view and from my point of experience, it's a unique attempt which was undertaken in Cottbus, and it's worth to continue. And we are very happy that Mr. Frommelt, that he is working on this issue. So maybe we can continue in the third edition and have, maybe we discuss it later. That's wonderful if there are already we will take, if there is anybody who will discuss or has questions, we will notice it. So I wanted to introduce Johanna Blokker. She is now holds the chair for architectural conservation at the Brandenburg University of Technology, Cottbus Senftenberg, all in all. She is a native Canadian. She studied in Toronto and in Washington and New York and also in Bamberg. And she has a very, from my point of view, she had a specific approach that is to discuss heritage and architecture always from including the political dimension and the function of architecture for societies and for creating narratives and also for creating collective identities or self-understanding. So I think it's a very good and informative approach. Now she is leading the DFG, the German Research Community program on buildings in the Allied occupation in Western Germany from 1945 to 1955. The heritage of democratization in Germany's built landscape. And I can imagine that it is a total change of perspective when you are now in Cottbus and you are surrounded by Soviet and socialist heritage and also by the political function of this young heritage. Her focus is teaching an architectural history and history of art and theory of architectural conservation, including heritage policy, and to discuss historical narratives. And that is always implying to think about how is it useful for the scholarship and for the society. So we are very glad and curious to listen to your presentation here, Johanna.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I first have to find, so I have to press escape here, I think. And I'm going to minimize this and open this. Öffnen, ja. Und dann ein nee. Ich brauche eine Bildschirmpräsentation. Ich bin Mac-User halt, ne? Hier unten.
Ja, rechts.
Das hier. Das hier. Oh. Doch oben. Okay. Okay, good. Thank you. What I'm going to offer you is less of a lecture than a set of comments on various things that we've been talking about in the past couple of days, things we have seen and just heard again in your presentation and in Cottbus. I don't intend to take more than 10 or 15 minutes for it. So thank you for your patience. But just before I start, on the topic of maps, and Cottbus and including things on maps, Danica and I, we had the experience when we did our workshop, or when we did your workshop in Cottbus a couple of weeks ago, and you'll hear about that when I'm finished. As you noticed when we were in Cottbus today, the tourist information is in the Stadthalle, but if you go there and you ask for a tourist map, the Stadthalle is not on that map because the tourists are not directed to the socialist heritage of the city. They're directed to the medieval heritage, to the 19th century heritage. There's wonderful Gründerzeit, lots of Jugendstil architecture in the city of Cottbus, but the socialist heritage is not on the map, even though the office for tourism is in the main socialist building in the city. So there's a strange contradiction happening there. Okay. I'm just showing you some examples here of how the field of architectural conservation, at least, in Germany has been engaging intensively with GR architecture and socialist heritage in a broader sense for well over a decade, for 2 decades or so. And I'm just showing you some very recent examples. These are 2 volumes of the state authorities for heritage conservation from the first and the second volumes of 2022, and they have articles, significant articles in them dedicated to, now I forget, does anyone in the room know which Stadthalle this is? This is not Cottbus's Stadthalle, it's in another city in Brandenburg. It's on the tip of your tongue, right? Schwed, is that Schwed? Okay, that's Schwed. Focusing here on the cover, at least on the art inside the building, but the building itself is also fascinating, and there's a great deal of attention being paid in conservation circles to this heritage. One of the first attempts to create a sort of scholarly overview of what's called in German often modernism of the East, Ostmoderne, included two conferences, these early efforts. The first one in Weimar in 2011 with a publication the following year, and then a second, Unit 1 and Unit 2, a second conference in 2014, resulting in a publication here a year later. So these two volumes of essays that resulted from conservationists talking to ourselves and talking to each other about our new, at that time still relatively new interest, and coming to grips with this heritage. These volumes of essays raised a series of questions, which we've been talking about in the past couple of days. So questions, for example, about the specific qualities of Ostmoderne, so modernism of the East, as opposed to modernism of the West. What sets the Eastern modernism apart from that in the West, or from that happening internationally at the same time? What are the unique qualities of Eastern modernism, both aesthetically and also technically or technologically? These volumes also raise questions, of course, about the relationship between discourses of architecture and conservation on the one hand, and discourses of geopolitics on the other, discourses of ideology that this architecture is meant to express, and to what extent can we bring these two, or should we bring these two discourses together? To what extent do conservationists have to think about politics, in other words? And these volumes also raised questions about this particular confrontation, even you could call it, confrontation between East and West that one can observe in a city like Berlin, for example, as a unique showcase for that. And of course, that confrontation, or that double heritage, is the focus of this planned nomination where ICOMOS is participating in the proposal to nominate the Stalinallee and the Hansaviertel to the World Heritage List, as we saw in our tour on Tuesday. In these volumes and in the literature generally, you also see a special focus on department stores, and Dimitri just mentioned this. So Warenhäuser, Kaufhäuser from the GDR period. And these buildings are, of course, under constant pressure from the market to change, to keep up with fashion, to always seem new. And you see just two examples, and you actually mentioned these and the things that have happened here. The Warenhauszentrum here in Berlin on Alexanderplatz, and how it looked before, and then after the remodeling, change of name and remodeling. And same thing happening in Dresden. In Dresden, the entire building was demolished. Wasn't just refaced like here, but was entirely demolished. But on the other hand, they did try to remind or recall this sculpturality of the facade that was a hallmark of the building in Dresden, not using the original parts, imitating them, so creating them new, and obviously not having at all the same impression. But this is the kind of pressure that especially retail buildings are under to remain current, to remain attractive then to consumers who are always looking for something new. Of course, there's additional pressure now due to our changing patterns of consumption, the fact that we don't go so often, or large groups of consumers at least don't go so often anymore to major department stores. They shop online, or they shop in other kinds of shops than in large department stores. And we mentioned that today in connection with Cottbus, that Cottbus has one of the doomed Galeria Kaufhof department stores that is going to be closed and will lose a major anchor in its downtown core. So these major department stores are a focus, of course. Also, the various houses of culture, houses of the people, palaces of the Republic, and so on that you find throughout Germany have also been, of course, a primary focus of our attention. You mentioned it again, of course, Palast der Republik with its bronze, striking bronzed glass facade. You mentioned also the fact that there was a longish period where there was a very public discourse about this building and what to do with it. And you see here an art installation on the roof with the word Zweifel, which means doubt. Doubt. And we are feeling doubt about the future of the nation, of course, the future of Germany after reunification, but also about the future of this building and what it stands for in the heart of Berlin. And this is, in the meantime, is a very famous photograph that expresses this as well. At this point, the Palast der Republik is gone. There's nothing but an empty field. And someone has, in very eloquent graffiti, said, there never was a GDR, right? The GDR never existed, in other words, which is the kind of the statement being made there. It's a very famous throughout the media photo that has been published. And of course, under the impression of this event, which was very controversial, of course, the conversations about other examples. And I think under the impression of the demolition of the Palace of the Republic, it became clear to a city like Dresden that that's probably not something that should be repeated in this context, although the Palace of the Republic, as you mentioned, was up for grabs. It was not clear what its future might be, especially given, as we all know, the push to rehistoricize the center of Dresden by reconstructing the Frauenkirche, but even more critically, I would say, by reconstructing all of the buildings around it on the new market to give the impression as though the GDR never existed. And this, the Neumarkt is just a stone's throw away from the old market. So they are in visual contact with each other, less and less as time goes on, but they're in visual contact with each other. So there was for a while at least, an open question as to whether the Palace of Culture would be allowed to remain. But I think under the impression of the sense of loss of the Palace of the Republic in Berlin, that question is not quite so open, and it certainly isn't now, right? So often you have to lose something in one context before you realize its value when you see it again in another context. So in these volumes, which I've just shown you, and I have one here if you want to, the first one, if you want to look through it and look at what kinds of topics are discussed and what the approach is. But in these volumes and in other works as well, a lot of attention is given to the perception of these buildings by the broader public. It's of course a scholarly publication from the point of view of heritage professionals, but there's a great deal of interest also in the perspective of non-professionals and how they perceive these buildings, what their feelings are towards them. And this makes sense, of course, because conservation and heritage itself as a concept are in the final analysis about a lot more than preserving examples of design history or preserving witnesses to political developments, to political history. And that is, of course, a very vital function of these buildings. But heritage and conservation of heritage is also about people's attachments to places and people's identification with their built environment, the values that they attribute to it. And we can attribute values of our own as professionals to these buildings, but in the last analysis that doesn't help much if we don't have the support of the public and their attachments, which we also then have to take seriously, even though they might not be the same kinds of attachments or same values that we would attribute. This level of attachment is at times quite surprising. We all remember, or some of us maybe perhaps remember, the protests that took place. This is the Palace of the Republic, already in a state of half demolished state. The protests against this ongoing demolition, and these protests were only, as you can see from what they've written here, stop the demolition now, or corruption and greed. Who pays? We do, right? So the motivation for the protests were only partly enthusiasm for design or enthusiasm for history. Some of these people were history buffs, people interested in history. They were also in part, and Dmitry Russo referred to this as well, The protests were, at least in part, also motivated by the memories, the personal memories that people had of their time spent in the building in all of these social offerings, the dances, the bar, and so on, which you see here. So their own memories associated with this building and the time that they spent there. So the attachments to this building are not necessarily are not necessarily the same ones that we share, although we might have those kinds of feelings as well. Very remarkable was the initiative that led to the listing as a monument, and I'm just showing you the book. The cover of the book that I'm handing around shows someone holding up the official symbol of a monument as a kind of a triumph, because there was an initiative that led to the listing in 2011 of this canteen, so a cafeteria building on another university campus in Weimar, the Bauhaus Universität in Weimar. Which was also slated for demolition to be replaced by a Bauhaus museum. So there's a kind of an irony there to replace a genuine example of socialist modernism with a museum to the idea of modernism itself in the form of a Bauhaus museum. And it was very interesting to observe over a number of years the student-led protest on the university campus, which then spilled out over the campus, over the limits of the campus, onto the internet. Students were able to arouse a great deal of support in the public until this building was then finally listed, a very young building, only completed in 1982, but still managed to get recognized, and for reasons that are fairly obvious when you see the photographs. This building did not make it into the Germany volume, unless I'm mistaken. I didn't see it there, but maybe in volume 2 it can be there, because it's also, or volume 3. Okay, volume 3. Sorry. Good. We mentioned briefly our workshop in Cottbus. That was the ICOMOS Emerging Professionals Group, as it's called. We held a workshop earlier this month, at the beginning of April, from the 3rd to the 5th of April. And in the context of this workshop, we also discovered broad support for the conservation of Cottbus's Stadthalle, which is what you see here in an older photograph from 1987. I just happen to remember what year that photograph is from. And those of you who were with us today will recognize that the surroundings of the Stadthalle were much, much different in the late 80s compared to what they are now. Today, there's a very tall, glossy hotel and a shopping mall next to the Stadthalle. But our investigations in that context revealed broad support for the conservation of the Stadthalle, which did make it into the volume that I have. And they revealed regret at the loss of what was called the Stadtpromenade, and that's what you see here. You see the Stadthalle in the background as the head of the ensemble. This is just a model from 1960, when still in the planning phases. But this large residential building is still there. This higher residential building is still there. This residential building is still there as well. But all of these pavilions, including this here, the Cosmos Milk Bar, have been demolished. And not long ago, in 2002, so really too recently for comfort, actually, that by 2002 we shouldn't have been making those kinds of decisions anymore, I should think, although the Palast der Republik was also at exactly the same time. But our investigations, and here's our student group, talking to people, passers-by at the Stadthalle and others in Cottbus, our impression was that there's a great deal of attachment to the building, again, not as design and not as a witness to GDR history, but as an accepted and valued part of the urban environment. And people spoke most of the time about their own experiences, not about the great history that they have learned about. Perhaps some of them hadn't lived this history, of course, because reunification was a long time ago already. So they more talked about their own experiences, how they had shopped in the pavilions or used the pedestrian bridge and so on. So there's a regret at the loss of this ensemble. but mostly in terms of the loss of a functioning public space that hasn't, in Cottbus, has not been compensated by what came after. And that's the main problem in Cottbus, is that things were torn down without replacing them with something of equal, at least equal value. So in terms of people's attachments, I think there's plenty of support for the work that we're trying to do in conservation. Maybe the public's motivation is different from ours, but the support is there and the interest is there for the work that we do on a professional level. And I think there's also growing interest on the part of those who do not have long personal histories with these buildings or with this heritage, especially, I'm talking especially about younger people. This architecture, as we can see so clearly from these volumes of photographs, this architecture is daring, and I'm only showing the cover, which shows details, but we've all looked through the books, I think. This architecture is daring. It's full of contrasts and contradictions. It walks this very fine line between the utopian and the dystopian. It's a very fine line between those two. And it's extremely photogenic, this architecture. And I think that this is really highly appealing to a generation that carries a camera around in its pocket at all times and is constantly scanning the environment for striking images. It's also a generation, I think, that is fascinated by, a little bit horrified, but mostly fascinated by the failed dreams, and it's sometimes the spectacularly failed dreams of its parents' generation. Right? And I'm reminded, if I can take you on a little detour for a moment, I'm reminded, for example, of this very popular television series from a couple of years ago on about the Chernobyl disaster in the Ukraine. And if you do a little bit of looking on the internet, you find out where it was filmed. So this stands for the settlement near, not in, but near Chernobyl. And it's a Plattenbau mass housing in Vilnius that was made to stand for that. And so a huge new public is fascinated by and learning about what a socialist society meant and how people lived, and what the ideology behind this living and building activity was. So I'm reminded of that, maybe even more recently. Perhaps you have watched this. It's a fascinating television series, again from the United States, but it shows an international interest. And what this is, Severance is the name of the program. It's a dystopian fiction about an alternative 1990s, an alternative reality of the 1990s if society had gone in a different direction. And I won't go into it further, but it does, I mean, the series takes place in the United States. It is filmed at this Bell Works complex, which is from exactly more or less our time period, but designed by Saarinen. And you can see this fascination with the aesthetic of the 1970s and 1980s. The fascination with the aesthetic, this almost, it's unheimlich, it's an uncanny aesthetic, and it's being played with. And of course, this is all the United States, but you can see that what they're referencing, right? This is a figurehead in the story. I won't go into it, but they're referencing this socialist sort of atmosphere by giving us what could be a reference to Marx or a reference to Engels, what have you, in the founder of this corporation that they all work for. So there is this fascination there. So there is an audience for this architecture. Perhaps again, not for the reasons that we would like people to be interested in it, right? But I don't think that we should say no to anybody's interest in this architecture, no matter what its motivation. I'm also reminded, second last thing it reminds me of is the general popularity, and really the general popularity among architecture, people interested in architecture, but far beyond that, in the SOS Brutalism exhibition, which was mounted at the German Architecture Museum in Frankfurt with this wonderful slogan, which they've translated into English, "Save the concrete monsters." So there's this recognition that they are monstrous, but that that they are lovable monsters, or monsters that nevertheless have a value of some kind. Extremely popular exhibition, started in Frankfurt but has been on world tour ever since. Here it's making a stop in the US. At the moment, I believe it just opened in New York again, so there's a broad interest internationally for engaging with what we have so far considered to be uncomfortable or not in good taste architecture. There's a definite willingness and almost this daringness and the extremes of this architecture are what are attracting people in a way. Okay, so there are multiple levels, I think, on which we can appeal to the next generation beyond the level of art historical or socio-political significance of these buildings. Those are the levels on which we customarily operate and which we then try to convey to the public and should continue to do so, obviously. But I think it's a great idea to have a coffee table book, a picture book that can also appeal to the simple pleasure that these buildings are able to arouse in people. So despite, and I'm coming to a close now, despite our best efforts, we do have a long way to go. The Ahornblatt, the maple leaf, has been mentioned a few times in our presentations and in our discussions. There's a long way to go, and as the author of that book that I've put around, or the editor that I've sent around, noted already in 2012, it's a race against time because this heritage is being discovered by more and more people at the very same time as it's being destroyed, right? So there's very little difference. It's being discovered and sometimes in the moment that it's destroyed, and perhaps because it's being destroyed. And I think what can help to accelerate this process of discovery and keep it ahead of the wave of destruction is work such as Dmitry Rusu's, getting this architecture into the public eye, using his artist's eye to reveal the ordinary as extraordinary, perhaps. And it takes an artist's eye to do that, to reveal this architecture maybe for the first time, not only to people who have never seen it before, but to people who see it every day, but have maybe stopped perceiving it in some way. And the artist's eye can help you to see things in a different way. And this is the last thing I'm going to show you that it reminds me of. I'm reminded of this ongoing project by a Berlin photographer by the name of Mila Hake, her ongoing project to capture the buildings of the occupation period in Germany after 1945. And in 2009, she mounted an exhibition, Geschenke der Amerikaner, also gifts from the Americans, about buildings that were erected during this short occupation period, with spectacular photographs mounted then in the what is now the photo gallery CO Berlin, but that CO Berlin is housed in the former America House, so housed in an example of the architecture from that period. And this exhibition was very favorably received a huge echo in the press, and opened many people's eyes in Berlin and beyond to the treasures that are right in front of them that they had never really perceived before. So perhaps in leading over to our discussion, maybe in addition to publishing more volumes, maybe an exhibition, a traveling exhibition that could maybe travel in the same way that SOS Berlin has traveled and has met with, or SOS Brutalism, I mean, and has met with interest all over the world. This is certainly something that we hope to do. Here's me and my team in that project that you mentioned, which is buildings of the Allied occupation in Western Germany. And we hope to, a lot of these buildings they're all around us, right? These buildings, especially in Berlin, but not only, throughout Western Germany. These buildings are everywhere to be found, and they are entirely invisible because people don't know about the history, and because we don't have a good photographer who has made them his or her subject and has brought them to the attention of the public. And so that's something we hope to do in the context of this research project, is to make these buildings visible on an intellectual level, but also on a visual level, perhaps with an exhibition. which is something that we are looking for funding for, perhaps with the cooperation of you, perhaps with the cooperation of Mila Hake, we already have her on board for some things, but those are our sort of plans for the future. And with that, I will leave it and look forward to the discussion that we'll have in a moment. Yeah? Okay, thank you.
Oh ja, stimmt doch. Klar. Das machen wir einfach so zu. Komm. Nee, wieder nicht. Nee, und dann machen wir es ganz zu. Brauchen wir doch nicht. Das. Okay.
Yeah, so good evening, everyone. Once again from my side, and I will briefly and really spontaneously say something about a workshop, Stadthalle Cottbus, that was organized by Emerging Professional Working Group of ECOMOS Germany, together with Johanna, and chair of architectural conservation at BTU Cottbus. So when we even started thinking about designing a workshop, and with the idea that it's going to be in Cottbus, we were rethinking what could be that case study that we could be facing with. And then we came up to Stadthalle Cottbus with a starting point of thinking of re-asking its values and seeing if it's, as said, anchored to the hearts of the Cottbuser. As already we mentioned and we saw today in our Cottbus tour, that a couple of buildings that are part of building ensemble from the GDR heritage were being demolished in Cottbus, and then we were asking ourselves, is that the destiny that could be waiting for Stadthalle? And that's why we decided to pick it up exactly for our case study for the workshop. And just briefly, it took 3 days at BTU Cottbus, had around 20 participants around the whole world, or international students that are mostly studying in Germany, and they were interested also in the developing and history of GDR heritage. And what we also thought that the students will mostly be dealing with the building as itself, but it was not the case. After the tour similar tours that we had today in the Stadthalle directly and also around it, and in the urban fabrics of Cottbus in the Stadtpromenade, most of the students decided themselves to deal with the whole urban context of Stadthalle, not just with the building itself. And what they were questioning then was the value of the building as itself with the people of Cottbus. And the answer was that most of them are connecting to it, to the events that are going on today, but not at something a part of GDR heritage. And what we were also impressed by and didn't expect of the students, that they were rethinking how to invite more of the people in the building by redesigning the urban context in front of it. And what were the conclusions? As said, that it's not that the Stadthalle is not been totally listed as a sightseeing place in Cottbus, but just as an event place. And then the students developed a lot of ideas how it could be rejoined in the program of the whole city and whole city fabrics. So unfortunately, we printed out really big posters in Cottbus, and we showed to some of you them today. But right now we are preparing to publish all the outcomes on the e-commerce website. So I'm really sorry that not all of you today could see it, but hopefully in following weeks on e-commerce website we will publish all the outcomes. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you. I also wanted to thank Johanna and Danica for this marvelous day today. Those who are following us online are a bit behind of us all who enjoyed a marvelous tour in Cottbus to see the campus, but also this Stadthalle. So it was quite an experience and a very good introduction how it is taught in Cottbus. So thank you for that. But now we are silently rearranging the scene, and we are asking some people here to join the discussion table. And I would start with calling out for Christoph Rauhut. And as we are talking about universities, then Christoph's background is Aachen University and ETH Zurich University. And he has worked in many prominent positions as the advisor at the General Office of the German Cultural Heritage Committee and the Federal Government Commission for Culture and Media, but since 2018, Christoph Rauhut has been State Conservator and Director of the Berlin Heritage Authority. Then I call also for Dora Ivanova, who has also studied she's from Bulgaria, but she has studied also in Germany, and it's already a worldwide known project of Puzlucha that she's running, creating awareness there. Then we have Oxana, yes, Gourinovitch. And Oxana's background is from Belarus, and she's also the member of ICOMOS Belarus, and now she's staying and working in Germany, in Aachen and Berlin, and she has created several exhibitions on Gastmoderne in Potsdam and about Minsk. Yeah, she's, as I said, now in Berlin. She has studied there, and yes. And then we have Kirsten Angermann. She is a research and teaching assistant at the Chair for Conservation and History of Architecture at Bauhaus University in Weimar, and works also as a freelance conservator and freelance architect, as I know. So, I will join you.
We can start. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your patience when we are reorganizing ourselves here and the panel. We want to discuss with the audience, with all of you, the result of these 2 or 3 days we had and of the excursions, and what kind of project of cooperation could be continued by those who are involved in the whole project or by those who were listening and attending these meetings. And we said we want to take it very simple. We would like to ask everybody on the podium or on the panel about his opinion or her opinion on the work of Dumitru Rusu and on this, and if there to give a common feedback for him with the results. And the second is, which is much more important and where the whole audience is invited to join us and to discuss is the future of this initiative and what kind of cooperation are possible. You make, for example, the offer to cooperate together with Miller Hake and Dumitru Rusu on socialist modernism to take photographs. And maybe there are also other ideas we discussed about what is Soviet modernism, what is maybe East modernism, what is Russian modernism, what are the different modernisms, could it be discussed and could be continued. And the main question is, from our point of view, is that we would like to know what kind of support is visible or is needed for the colleagues who are working in Ukraine under very difficult circumstances, because that is one of the reasons which became very urgent now to be discussed. And what is the role or what are the possibilities for ECOMOS, for Docomomo and other professional groups to become engaged or interested or maybe supported. So maybe we can start, Christoph Rauhut, with the question, what do you think about this kind of coffee table books on modernism here in Germany, and how to continue?
Thank you for the presentation and also for the books. I think they're great, and I think every one of us loves them, that's for sure. But books are also, and the way you approach the topic, I think also fulfills another function. Books are in a way a means to stabilize knowledge and to generate knowledge and to stabilize it, as we know from the science of the science. And that's why they are so important to have that, because they are kind of the starting point also for the work, for example, we do as a government agency. The first thing we do if we look at a building, we see what else has been published on this building yet. And so they are really mean in the stabilization of knowledge, and therefore also in the preservation of buildings in the second step. And I think you made some examples of also how this process of stabilizing a building as heritage can happen, and also that sometimes it was not successful. What I really also think is important is that but also show that it's not just about books nowadays. Modern means of communication give us more possibilities, and the endeavor is really to use all those possibilities and use the possibilities within them. And that's what Johanna Blokker also showed, I think, very precisely, that in this architecture is a very photogenic moment, and this is something we can use with social media, etc., maybe a lot better than with other kinds of architecture. And why not use this potential to gain an audience? And I think it's it's a moment we're in this phase where I think for us this heritage is quite established. I mean, we are still learning more and learning more, but there's a core really established, and we can also see how this core heritage is I think established in the wider public nowadays through exhibitions, etc. And it's really interesting to see how you have people who are not professionals and maybe not the clear architectural enthusiasts also do know about this heritage nowadays. I think it's even also with the time span that we now have over 30 years to the end of the Eastern and Western Bloc, that it is historicized in a way, and we are at a very interesting moment in time, actually.
Yes, if it will be a proposal from the state agency for organizing an exhibition, we could do it with our pleasure, of course. And
okay, maybe we can discuss it together and wait for some statements because we have only half an hour left now. And that is why I would like to ask Kirsten Angermann, who never was able to give a statement to discuss it, and then we will close this one. Please, Kirsten. And Kirsten Angermann is what I would like to mention or emphasize is she did her PhD on what can be called socialist postmodernism. She finalized it, I think, in December last year at the Bauhaus University in Weimar. So she is an excellent specialist and expert on this field. Yes.
Yeah, thank you. So in that case, I'm looking kind of beyond, or at least after socialism, in a way. Yeah, I think what I find most intriguing about those books is, and you mentioned it also with the project by Łukasz, that this aestheticization of the objects is an effect and a means to promote this kind of heritage. And I think we have seen it a lot during history in conservation and heritage studies, that there was someone who put meaning to something just by dealing with it. We know in Germany the photographs of Bernd and Hilla Becher, who took photographs of industrial buildings. It was something and no one could imagine up until this point that those could be subjects of a photograph, a very artistic one. And so that there's only the fact that there is this coffee table book, and it's not cheap, which is not a critique, but it's also a means to give value to the objects.
For the last book, we didn't pay for the printing house, so these are the prices.
No, it's not a critique. It's just it's a part of putting value to something in a way, and to appreciate it also, and to do it in a certain quality. And I think for myself, I have dealt with GDR architecture for almost or over a decade now, but looking through this book, I see kind of a foreign gaze to it, that
nostalgia.
Not nostalgia, just that someone from Romania like you comes to East Germany, and the selection of objects is something I haven't seen in its wholeness in German publications. For example, I have never seen the Ministry for State Security photographed in this way. It's an example, because I was really curious about the selection, what kind of buildings are included, which buildings are left out. So it was just
actually all the information.
Observation.
Yes, actually all the information was taken from the archive of the Bauhaus Foundation. So everything was there. I was just pointing them out and going to see them, and that's it.
And of course, it's this kind of moment in time that is preserved in the book. So you can see the condition of the buildings during a certain period of time. I think the photographs are within a couple of years, maybe. So this is also a source in a way, and in another way, it has kind of limitations to use it as an academic source. It's also not the point at this.
No, the idea that on the final of the book you have an index with all the information about the architects. And, and also the book is connected to the interactive map. So it's not just a coffee table, it's a tool for finding valuable architecture.
Exactly, is my last point, where I would see the potential.
It's connected to social media.
Yeah, and I think this is the potential, this participatory approach in a way. Everybody can go to the website and add information. It's like what we call citizen science now. So this is kind of the connection I see and the huge potential of using this data. It's a database actually, and you can add on to it, and you can also pull something out. So I think this is a major potential of the whole
still
project.
adding information.
It's
So the introduction in the first 2 days, we emphasized that it is a work in progress and that it is an invitation not only to be read, but also to be complemented and to be extended and so on. And that is a unique chance, especially if you combine it with the database, with the map, with the digital website, which is more than only the book. The book is worth to be discussed, of course, and presented, but the instrument is more. Oxana, what is your opinion and what is your advice?
I have to say that for me the books are actually rather signifiers of the meta output from Dumitru, because I think that the meta influences that you basically changed minds of great amount of people. I think that the main body of work is rather of ephemeral nature. Just to clarify, Dumitru has more than 1 million users, and his online presence, is an omnipresence. And actually the books is just an attempt to materialize, to catch this ephemeral huge
amount of information.
Exactly, just to have something in a hand. So for me, it's basically actually just a reminder about how much the world, how much the perception of this period of architecture changed thanks to your really amazing, very consistent effort during a decade. I mean, nobody else did really achieved this consistency and this amount of documentation, and alone this is so I think that it's important just to put in perspective the books, and the rest is just really tiny materializations. I think I would like to wish 2 things. For one, I really still wish a book on Belarus. I've heard that it makes no commercial sense to produce it, but I still hope you
the map is ready, but it's
200
I need to print it.
That would be great. Just because it's
just a few words.
Let us collect the comments and then
you. It's my first wish, and the second wish. So it's like the visibility of the phenomenon is really increased thanks to you. My second wish is rather not on you, but in general. I'm thinking about Lützow's Burkhardt and him talking about the design is invisible. I really wish that we know a bit more about the invisible part of this phenomena, about institutional organization, all kinds of, which still remains largely, hugely unresearched.
Thank you very much. So we have to complete it also with this kind of information which is not visible and which is not in the index.
Dora, produce, we need to sell books and maps. So
that is why you are here.
for 3 days and no one buys anything. So, so this is not my goal.
May I ask you, Dora? You already mentioned, or in the, I think it was in the first or second evening, you were enthusiastic about the books and about the message. But what is your advice, or what is your experience, how it can be also used also for, let's say, to activate citizens to become a friend of modern heritage, which is not loved by everybody everywhere? How to multiply this effect beyond the friends of socialist modernism?
Yeah.
Yes, there are of course many different tools and ways, but today I learned actually a lot, so I want to combine this question with the question, what did we learn in the last days? Johanna, Blokker, I want to thank you for that, because of course as architects and people in the sphere of conservation, we see the qualities of buildings which are maybe not so easily understandable or could be easily seen by people outside of the sphere. And this was very interesting to me to think about the memories, the personal experiences, which they connect, not so much about how the architecture looks like or what its quality, and the function, that actually it's the function that is important for the majority, how they use those places and not which period they belong to or which style or architect they are created by. And it's economic logic behind it, as you showed. So who is paying for changing, or who is paying for demolishing, or what's happening afterwards? So, and those things we tend to go in between them as people in this sphere, although they're absolutely in front of our eyes. But also, not only that, but as you showed the movies, the media, the pictures, the books of Dumitru, that are shaping the understanding, the interest. And I think all those, so this is actually the language we could speak to those people, and not so much about styles and why one style is special in comparison to other style. So I think this is really maybe basic but super important thing that we have to keep repeating. So thank you for that. And I'm thinking actually. So it's a question. I don't know what's the answer. So why it is that this period is so striking? Why that it's going as creating a trend? Besides the work of Dumitru, for sure, it's creating the trend, as said. But what it is about it that make people really relate to it? And it's obviously, again, not our perception, but it's a different perception. Is it maybe because of it's experimental? Is it because this relates to today's generation, which wants to see more personalized and more experimental designs and things around in our surroundings? Is it maybe because of this dystopia? This was very interesting that you said. I want to refer to it, that young people are fascinated by the spectacularly failed dreams of their parents. So why are they fascinated about this? Is it maybe connected to the end of the Cold War, and that we are again in the next dystopia phase somehow, with a utopia in front, which maybe didn't happen?
Maybe because of 20 years of architecture of Stalin, so maybe that's why.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting topics to see again with different eyes what it is about this buildings, which is really connecting to today's people. And I think this is important, so we can really do this connection. So we are the transmitter of this bond, and we have to create the bond to save the buildings. And the better we understand it, the better we can be this missing linkage in the system.
If there is somebody who can answer these questions, I think it is Johanna Blokker, because Yes, you shared your experience with the different views and the different addressees, and I think it's very helpful not to be disappointed when people love monuments because of other reasons than we appreciate them. And that is part of the business. We have to cover all these interests and motivations and to bring them together, not only from a not narrow-minded, but from a very specific scientist or professional point of view, because the heritage is not for the conservationists, not for art historians, architectural historians, it's for the society, for the community. So if we do not convince them, we will lose, as we did, for example, Aachen. We lost it, but that was the signal to save every Myther building in the Republic. That's interesting. Sometimes these losses, they are very important because they are mobilizing and opening minds and consciousness about architecture, which would never have been possible without this. I did not need the loss, but it's interesting that this was the signal. Everybody knows now Myther, who was a specialist in shell constructions and this.
May I add that actually this is not a very unique phenomenon to like this type of architecture, because like in 1920s, when Estonia and many other countries in Eastern Europe gained independence, the heritage of the previous periods was really neglected, and it was not liked at all. And it was many of, for example, of Baltic German manor houses were demolished. And once they were demolished, it comes the understanding that it's not the heritage of them, but it's also heritage of us. And so it's the same with the socialist period, that these buildings were abandoned and disliked because it was sort of the heritage of them, of the Soviets. But now we are coming to this phase that this is heritage of us. And we are finding this like national ideas in it. And sometimes even on the most propagandist monumental art, you are looking for that maybe there are like hidden symbols of resistance in there. So, which was, for example, in Mariamäe, we had a very propagandist painting, and every time we went there, we were looking for this. There is one corner there where were blue, black, and white colors on the blouse of the cosmonaut, which are the flag of Estonia. So you are looking for these symbols of resistance, and this is also the way forward with this heritage, and that is what we are now actually trying to get your opinions on. It's very hard. Of course, all our hearts are with Ukrainians, and we see that the situation is very dramatic. How to say something good about modernist architecture and art and monuments when they are definitely the symbols of them, the Russians, but maybe they are also the symbols of local people, and what we lose in coming decades if we really have them demolished all.
May I give over to Christoph Rauhut. Christoph Rauhut, in the last European Heritage Day, which takes place in Germany in September, I think it was in the Parochialkirche, which is a bombed and ruined church, which has not been really rebuilt or repainted, but it is repaired, and so it is a wonderful open space to discuss. And it was discussed the situation in Ukraine with colleagues from Ukraine. Some of them were volunteers in Landesdenkmalamt before, so we have a certain relation to them. And I asked myself, what is the point of view, or how can this experience, for example, and this motivation, how can it be transferred, or how can it be linked to the situation in Ukraine with this heavy losses and destructions and devastations we see everywhere, and as it was, for example, shown in the Café Moscow at the end of February, which was renamed as Café Kiev, and it was totally different what was present there, but it was very moving from my point of view. What do you think, how can this heritage dialogue or discourse, how can it be enabled to be supportive and to pay attention to the situation in Ukraine and to the heritage in Ukraine?
It's a difficult question because obviously there are two different processes. We talk about the one is the loss of heritage because we don't recognize it, and the other is the loss of heritage and lives through deliberate destruction. But what is maybe joined is that we know that cultural heritage is deliberately destroyed in war situations because it is in part of the identity. And my feeling is that in a maybe not the same way, but in a way we can compare to the Aachen blood, where we lose something, we learn something about our heritage, that at least we in Europe, by losing heritage in the Ukraine and seeing that being destroyed, learn a lot about the Ukrainian heritage nowadays, and it's kind of put on the table, and it is gaining some more attention, and we also do see our blind spots we have as a society, a European society. Because even with the example of the Aachen blood now, I just asked myself, well, how many buildings were actually demolished and we didn't recognize their importance, and there was not this effect of recognizing a whole set of other buildings which could be linked to that. If, for example, if we talk about engineering, bridges, etc., and if maybe the Aachen blood is very easy to see, but I believe there's a constant loss of the diversity of culture, and the situation in Ukraine is comparable maybe to that. So, and this was also the idea of when we did the event in the Parochialkirche, to remind us of the density, diversity, of the richness of the heritage of the Ukraine, and we could really see how then we had a following up event at the Triennale der Moderne, where we would rather discuss about the socialist heritage, and I think it's very important that we continue this dialogue. There's a lot to learn, and the feedback we got was that it was very important for those in Ukraine fighting for this heritage. This recognition by us, and I think that's why it has to be a constant recognition, is also a very important support for them.
To be as courageous as you are, that could mean that, for example, you presented Aachen blood when it was destroyed. You didn't present Aachen blood as we loved it. And that's interesting, because that was the mobilizing effect. That was this kind of destruction of stupidness, which became visible and which was disseminated by photographs all over the world. And so the question is, that is a question to the photographers, of course, if the pictures and the photographs of destruction in Ukraine, and you see, I'm touched by this experience, maybe that is the background, could it be helpful to raise awareness not only for World Heritage Sites? We discuss World Heritage Sites in Ukraine, what is about Kiev, what is about the new entry of Odessa, and what is about the tentative list with Kharkiv, etc. But for the normal or everyday heritage, and for the context where people are living there, could it be helpful, for example, to have this it's not a coffee table book, but a kind of inventory of the losses. There are
we are already working on the inventory of the losses. So.
there are these attempts are there already, but that is the question: what is possible with our means, with our possibilities we have with our instruments? And may I ask you, and may I invite you, Svetlana, Evgenia, Pavlo, Simon, please let us know what is your expectation, or what is your advice, what is your need?
I will just want to add that and repeat my thesis. My expectation is that professional solidarity way of reclaim this heritage of reclaim of Russia, this heritage, and claim it as Ukrainian Soviet cultural heritage is very important preservation and to recognize it in Ukraine.
Photographer and tour guide.
We all know him.
Yeah. Okay, you don't like him?
No.
No, I think he's doing a great job. Yes, but making more people appreciate this heritage.
Anna, may I ask you to speak in the camera, because it's in the
why is the camera important? I think that I personally admire this guy who continued to give lectures on Ukrainian modernist architecture even now during the war, and I think he's a photographer as well, and I think he could contribute, and it might be helpful to show alongside this destruction and this amazing heritage that you have in its best shape. Yes. Sorry.
What do you think, Svetlana? You received the book. I think you were the first one who received the book about Ukraine when we came here and gave it to you. And
children, I gave my opinion yesterday, and
can we ask you to speak to the camera, to share it?
More important is that you come to the front, because the microphone is there on the table.
Don't worry about it. I think that we need a common strategy
that is what we are talking about.
Yes,
Ukraine is part,
and Ukraine should be a part of that.
That is why
it will be nice to recognize our value of Ukrainian heritage by another countries. It supports us to push our government, our population to value it, to change their minds, maybe, I don't know. Because this situation is very, very dangerous. For example, it is not about architecture, just only architecture of Soviet period, but also even earlier period also.
Okay, I saw.
Do you see, I have some very not good news about our perspectives in that. For example, our mayor wants to rebuild one of our monuments
from Kharkiv.
In Kharkiv, yes, in that square, Svoboda Square, you know, I gave my lecture about it. The building of our administration, and the plan of our mayor to ruin all of them, just only leave one facade. And he discussed about it with some foreign architects, and he does not ask people or somebody else. They gives their interview about it.
Okay.
He's very proud about it. Do you see? Situation.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. Evgenia, you.
Yeah, I just want to add and remind that the really effective way to pursue to save this heritage is supporting the Ukrainian army, and everyone can do this by donation everywhere, and it's really
Lithuanian.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for this statement. Pavel and Simon.
Okay, let me be the first. I agree with the idea that was told by Svetlana, but I want to add some specific thought about how we can help. It's very important because the interest for social modernism in Ukraine came from the West, not from the inside. And when something is recognized inside Ukraine, this is not understood as something valuable. But if this interest and recognition comes from the West, this voice sounds louder. That's why for us it is very important that international organizations show their attention and show how they value Ukrainian heritage. Because our Minister of Culture is afraid to say a word to protect socialist modernism. We had roundtables that were initiated by Minister, and we with Evgenia Moya were on one of these roundtables. And it was not a friendly discussion because many authorities that came there were very aggressive against this heritage. And it was official talk with Minister, and they thought we must destroy all of it so no one could tell that it ever existed. Oh, this is the citation of mayor of city of Rauhut, who was personally involved in destruction modernist monuments. So on one side, as Evgenia told, it is important to support Ukrainian army to stop the war so we can protect modernism from the danger from Russia. But at the same time, it's very important to influence Ukrainian government and public officials by saying that this is valuable for the world. Because if you say this, this sounds much louder than we. When we say this, we can be threatened, we can be ignored. But if some important international organizations say the same, this would be understood in another way, including public officials. Because I know that Minister of Culture, once he told, when he was on a meeting with activists, he told that he supports Ukrainian modernism and this is part of our heritage. But now he is afraid to say that again.
Okay, thank you very much. That was a very clear statement, and now it's up to Pablo. Yes.
На жаль, Томас сьогодні відсутній через хворобу.
Unfortunately, Thomas is absent today.
Але ми з ним попередньо домовилися, що будемо спільно реалізовувати проєкт, який підтримав Український культурний фонд. Власне, по створенню цифрового порталу, присвяченому українському модернізму.
But we had an agreement that we will work together on creating a digital portal dedicated to Ukrainian modernism.
Партнером з нами, окрім Томаса, погодилася виступити Державна бібліотека будівництва та архітектури Заболотного.
The architectural library named after architect Zabolotny agreed to be the partner of this project.
Відповідно, наше основне завдання висвітити модерністську спадщину прифронтових та тимчасово окупованих регіонів України.
And it's very important to show the modernist heritage of those cities that are occupied or that are close to front.
Але це не данина, скажімо так, у тому числі нинішньому протистоянню війни, яка точиться вже другий рік.
But it's not only because of war that's happening for the second year.
а ще і певна, скажімо так, намагання досягти релевантності матеріалу.
But it's also an attempt to achieve the relevance of this material.
Так як саме Південний Схід це була зона найбільшої урбанізації, і, власне, там найбільше об'єктів, які представляють український модернізм.
Because the southeast of Ukraine is the territory that was mostly urbanized in socialist times, and that's why this is the territory that shows Ukrainian modernism in the most maybe effective way.
А тому ми разом з Томасом, візьму на себе таку сміливість,
That's why we together with Thomas
запрошуємо вас взяти участь у цьому проєкті.
Invite you to participate.
Для нас буде важливо обмінюватися інформацією і отримувати певний зворотній зв'язок. Це головне. І гадаю, к завершенню поточного року ми досягнемо вже певних результатів.
The most important is exchanging information and obtaining your feedback, and I hope that by the end of this year we will have already some results.
Як мінімум, у нас буде дві онлайн-зустрічі з синхронним перекладом, де зустрінуться провідні спеціалісти України та кого оберете ви та Томас.
We will have at least 2 online meetings where we will have some prominent specialists and some people that will be chosen by you and Thomas.
Усе це ми зробимо разом.
We will do it together.
Okay, thank you very much, and our best regards, of course, to Thomas to recover fast and sustainable, and to take over and to initiate this discussion. I have one aspect which is maybe from an e-commerce point of view could be interesting, because you are president of e-commerce Europe. Many of us, including Christoph, Rauhut, are member of e-commerce, and e-commerce was founded in 1965 as the first cultural organization, except of the UN, which was going beyond the East-West conflict, which brought together with the birthplace Warsaw and Krakow and Venice to organize something which is a cross-border organization. And my question is, this e-commerce Europe, where e-commerce Ukraine is member of, and where Rien is the vice president, and which will be organizing a meeting, I think in summer. Is there a possibility to think about a cooperation which is not only it's fantastic if there is a personal cooperation, but to have an institutional character of this? Because I think that is, from a political point of view, it could become important to say we do it on a European level, or we do a cooperation as Documomo did with the publication on this on modernism or on multiple modernism in Ukraine, to do something like this and to present it. Is that a possibility, or is this e-commerce and UNESCO in Ukraine not a factor, not a partner for activists?
I said that the most important question for him now planned.
Якщо інституційно вони звернуться до колег в Україні, це буде найкраща допомога, яка є.
And his opinion, the best way of communication will be between e-commerce Germany and e-commerce Ukraine on this question.
Тому що, на жаль, наш ІКОМОС здебільшого займається, я вже про це говорив, і не, скажімо так, знімається з порядку денного сакральною архітектурою та українським бароком.
Because unfortunately, Ukrainian ICOMOS focused on heritage of Baroque times and on churches. So this is the problem, that this is our focus.
Модернізм зараз перебуває на периферії інтересів наших національних органів.
Modernism is out of interest for national organs of heritage protection.
І руйнування Дніпровської ГЕС воно не викликало жодної реакції Національного комітету ІКОМОС.
And there was no single reaction for damage of the Dnipro power plant. Not single reaction from heritage protection organizations.
May I reply? ICOMOS is an organization of experts, of individual experts. And actually, the stronger the organization is, also in ICOMOS Ukraine, the more the experts are involved from different fields. So therefore, I really encourage you to join ICOMOS, or at least promote your colleagues to join ICOMOS, that all these themes are covered. And I must make a notice that when we had the last ICOMOS Europe group meeting last year in Poland, we had a brilliant presentation. I can't say by heart the name. The lady was called Olga, but the last name I can't recall now. On the heritage of Kharkiv. And this is definitely there. But from behalf of ICOMOS, I can tell you that ICOMOS is actually ready to organize trainings for the decision makers. It's also the experts, but together with the experts in Ukraine, to organize the trainings for the decision makers on the values of heritage, and we can take all this broad spectrum from Baroque to modernism and everything else. First of all, on the values of the heritage, but second also on the principles. ICOMOS has worked out the quality principle for EU-funded reconstruction works that can be modified to anything, and you are going to use a lot of EU funds for reconstruction one bright day that will arrive. That these are rather simple, but very grounded principles how to move forward so that we can reconstruct both the social values and infrastructure values, but without harming the heritage values and promoting the heritage values at the same time. So we are, there is a readiness for cooperation from, I hope, both sides. But it's very hard we need to go with direct contacts into this.
На жаль, у нас зараз немає часу на семінар. Ситуація така. Немає часу на семінари, на роз'яснювальну роботу, демонтаж будівлі машинного залу здійснюватися буде найближчим часом. І жодної публічної реакції наших національних органів немає. Тому ми просимо, як колеги, зверніться до них, можливо, вони прокинуться.
Unfortunately, we don't have enough time for trainings and for some meetings, because it is expected that the damaged building of Dnipro will be dismantled very soon. That's why it's very important to hear some public statement from international organizations for the value of this building, to be for this value to be told and to be somehow understood by Ukrainian authorities as soon as possible before it's dismantled.
But can you share the information so that we can have the reaction?
I think Pavlo can do it.
Yes.
We can create a heritage alert if we have the information.
Відповідну інформацію я надішлю, що зараз відбувається з цим об'єктом, і ми зможемо це питання вирішено.
All the information about what is happening to the subject right now, and we will be able to do something.
Okay, thank you very much. That's a very good solution, a very good promise, fantastic expectations for the whole project. I'm very thankful that you are, all of you, that Evgenia, Svetlana, Simon, and Pablo, that you are here. And as far as I understood, you are the only, you will come back or you will stay here. Evgenia will stay here, Svetlana as well. And I hope that we can stay in contact with you, Pablo, and with Zaporizhia, because I was really fascinated about the reports which were brought with by Thomas Flirl, Mr. Brenne, and all the others. It's very important. And of course, you feel that everybody is open to support or to at least to communicate and to multiply this message. And we will do what we can do, that is to take photographs, to document, and maybe it is possible to have a heritage alert and also maybe a heritage at risk special for Ukraine to produce it and to multiply it in this way. I now have to close because some of us have to leave to Cottbus with the train and it is late, but we have the opportunity to continue with a glass of wine, water, or what else, and to discuss it and to exchange opinions and solutions. I'm very thankful. Thank you to you. Thank you to Max Lingner Foundation and to the Max Lingner House and to the crew. Svetlana is part of Max Lingner House at least.
Thank you also for inviting me.
Thank you very much for to Thomas Flirl and good health and fast recovery, to Mr. Krummerei, who was very cooperative and collegial, and to Helle Panke, who were organizing the tours, the bus tours, Mrs. Ziemer. And of course, thank you to Betio Cottbus, our partner in Cottbus, Johanna Blokker and Ms. Petrovic. And thank you very much to Landesdenkmalamt, who has also supported the idea of meeting here and of having this kind of excursions. And thank you to Mr. Buchin, to our technical manager here in this situation, who did a great job because it was the first 3 evening event we had in this house, including the whole world. And it was a little bit, it was an experiment, but all in all, I think it was a successful experiment. Thank you very much.
May I also thank Dr. Helmut, who took care of all the arrangements. And our special thanks to Jörg Haspel, who is the motor behind all these events. So it's thank you, Jörg. Thank you again.